All right, so today we are going to be answering, or I am going to be answering some of your questions on our journey with dyslexia. A few months ago, I had done a series in my stories about your questions on dyslexia, and I forgot to save them to the highlights. And I've had a few people ask me about them since then, and so I decided to put it all in one place. So hopefully this is helpful to you. The first question that I had, I've kind of grouped some of the questions like questions that were like each other, similar questions together. So the first set of questions were, tell me about your journey. How did you know that you had a son with dyslexia, and how did you get him tested? So a little bit about our story. I have 6 children. I've homeschooled them from the beginning through I've graduated too. And my oldest son has dyslexia. And this is how I kind of came to find out. Mostly it was mother's intuition. But when he was little, when he was a baby, he was the kind of baby that was just really doing everything very early. Like he was just very anxious to learn, very alert, and just very active. He was rolling over very soon. He was crawling very early. He was walking very early. He was doing puzzles very early. So when he wanted to read very early, I just thought, okay, well, this is just his speed. And that's great. You know, every child has their speed of how they do things. And so I got a book out to teach him how to read, and it was like hitting a brick wall. And that was fine because he was little, and I put it away and I was like, no big deal. We'll just try it again. But he wanted to. He was like, oh, I want to learn to read. And so we would get it back out and we had started again. Another brick wall. And so I put it out, and I'd be putting it out for maybe months at a time, maybe 6 months at a time. I'd just put it away, and then I'd pull it back out. And it just over and over again, this is just what kept happening. So I would go to his child care visits, and I would say something to the doctor. I would ask moms around me at play dates and whatnot. And the answer from everyone was always the same. It was like, you're being a hyper mom. You don't need to worry about that. He's too young to be reading anyway. And so I kept putting it to the side, but in my heart, I was just all like, something's not right. Like, I just knew something was not right. My family has some dyslexia in it, and it tends to run in my family, and my husband has audio processing disorder that tends to run in his family. So I knew to be on the lookout for it. I just couldn't really get any help when he was little. It wasn't until he was in early elementary school, maybe first or second grade. And I remember I was his Sunday school teacher at church, and I went in, and at the beginning of the year, I went in with his class in the fall, and he was at the same level as all of his peers in that class. But then by the end of the year, all of the other kids in the class had taken off, and he still was really struggling. And that was just something I was noticing. It was just while they were reading other things, I was noticing that throughout the year. Eventually, and still the same thing, I was gathering resources. I was trying to ask people, but I just had a really hard time getting help until he was much older. It was about third grade that I took him in to get tested. And that's about the time where, from my understanding, that schools will test. So that's kind of a great, like, an age that they're really looking out for it. But I finally got some help from my doctor, and I went to a a neuropsychologist. We went privately to get him tested. Now, this is why I went privately. My experience in talking with other moms and doing research online, so limited to I did do a lot of research, but it was limited to how much research I could do, and how many people I could talk to about this. I had heard that schools will diagnose, and again, this could change. This is just my experience, so there may be good experiences out there, but this is my experience. So what I had heard was that schools will diagnose for a specific learning disability. I think that's the correct phrasing that they use. And because that's the diagnosis that they will give. It doesn't necessarily give you a diagnosis of dyslexia or audio processing. So that's why we decided to go privately. Another story that kind of goes into that is I had been sitting at a soccer game, and I was just anytime I heard anything about this issue, I was asking questions because I just knew something was wrong, and I was having a really hard time finding help about this. And there was another mom on the soccer team, and her son was actually going to a school that was for children with learning disabilities. And so I was asking her about it, and another parent who happened to be a school counselor, psychologist, anyway, he was like, oh, no, there's no such thing as dyslexia. You just need to give him this book, How to Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons, and he'll be fine. There's no such thing as dyslexia. And that is the book that he had gone completely from beginning to end of that book 2.5 times. And it's a great book. That is my first pick for teaching a child to read. My second son learned to read just fine with that book. So it's a great book. But for a dyslexic, it doesn't necessarily work all the time. For sure did not work for us. So when I heard someone tell me that, I was like, I don't think I can send my kids to the school to get tested for this, at least not in that situation. Maybe there's someone else who that would work for. And that's fine. That's great. But the key point is getting the help that your child needs. So I felt like for our situation in our area, I need to get him privately tested. So I did, and I learned a lot of great things from this woman. I told her the curriculum we had been using, and she kind of walked through like, okay, this is really good for this, but how about if we try some of these options for other areas? And so she gave me some great ideas. She was a wonderful resource. It was kind of pricey. Going and getting that testing done it's an investment. It was very much worth that investment, because then we were able to get a formal diagnosis from our pediatrician, and that helped for a few different things that I'll get into. So that is how we knew. There are some other things that I like that he would do that I was like, here's a big one, was that one time he was trying to read, and he stopped reading in the middle of it, and he just started banging his head, and he's like, I just can't get the words to stop jumping around the page. And I was like, I just knew something was wrong. So I just picked up on those. It was so much intuition, and I just tried to get help, the best help that I could, as soon as I could, and it took me a while to get some good help. So that is our story. Okay, so the next question is, does he have ADD too, or ADHD? And yes, he does actually. It's kind of funny because he does not have ADHD. He's not hyperactive, and nobody believed me when I said that he had a formal diagnosis of ADD. People just wouldn't believe me because he was a pretty mellow child. What was interesting is when it comes out when he is reading, or when he's doing something timed, like something on paper, like timed math tests. He was just bouncing around like it was almost like a different child. It was interesting. But yes, he does have a formal diagnosis of ADD, and we didn't honestly need to, because we homeschooled. Like he had the ability to like fidget more and move. Like it wasn't such a big deal for us. If he's causing a disruption somewhere, then we would have had to manage it more, but we were able to work with it pretty well. Something that I learned when he got tested, and I will probably not say this correctly, so don't take this as like medical advice at all. But I remember the lady who tested him, the neuropsychologist, she was talking about how there's different kinds of audio processing, or audio focus and attention, and there's different kinds of visual focus. And his audio focus was like off the charts. Like he was really good. And it's very interesting because that is how he showed up in life. He loves audiobooks, and if he listens to something auditorially, he can remember all the little details for years. I remember there being a time when we were doing this, it was just like some trivia questions. It was like some US trivia, and some very obscure question came up about one of the more obscure presidents that we don't learn a lot about, and he knew all these facts about this president. And I was like, how did you know that? And he's like, oh, do you remember those tapes that we used to listen to? And that, like, I had actually forgotten about him. That's how long it had been. And I was like, oh yeah, I do remember that. And it'd been years since we'd even gotten those out. Anyway, it was just amazing to me. So these children they're often just off balance. Like, they're like really, really compensate in some areas where they lack. And that can be used for some of their coping. So that is the answer to that question. Okay, so the next question is, does he have letter reversal? And you know what's strange? He didn't really have much of that. His problem was more sounding things out and being able to track across the page. And that's interesting. I mean, he did have some problems with letter reversal, and some dyslexics do. That's definitely a symptom. But that is actually something common that lots of children have. I've had other children that have struggled with some letter reversal when they've written, but he kind of overcame that. So that wasn't actually his biggest symptom or that sign that he had dyslexia. Okay, so the next question was to share some of my favorite resources. Okay, one of my very favorite resources, and I started this with him when I learned about it. He was a little older, because I was just figuring out that he had dyslexia. But then once I did it with him, I did it with all of my other kids, and it's called Aerobics, EAR, so like Aerobics. It is a computer program. It's hard to find these days, so if you can get your hands on it, they may actually have it may be an online subscription now. So look into it. My kids, it was a really great thing. It teaches phonemic awareness in children. And so that's pretty much, there's different like principles to learning phonemic awareness, but the basic idea is like matching sounds, manipulating like first sound, last sound, rhyming, syllables, like breaking words down into syllables and understanding how many syllable sounds you have or how many sounds are in a word. So there is just a computer game that taught phonemic awareness. There's other games where you can like cut things out and make little games out of for phonemic awareness. There's a book called Teaching Phonemic Awareness to Young Children. That was great. But this little program, Aerobics, it was a cute little computer program, and I did it with all my kids. There's 2 levels to it. And I honestly think a couple of my kids that showed signs of dyslexia, I feel like that helped bridge some of those gaps, that they were able, like I never even got them tested because they were doing so well with it. Now, was that just because they were just late bloomers? I don't know. But my main focus is for them to function well, right? And when they are, then I'm not overly concerned to get diagnosis and whatnot, because they're doing fine without getting frustrated. Okay, so another resource is we started out, you want to find an Orton-Gillingham method to teach reading. So Google it, just make sure that the reading program is Orton-Gillingham. It's very focused on phonics and changing out letters. The one that we started with is the Barton Method. It is kind of pricey. Her story is wonderful. I think it's called Bright Ideas for Dyslexia. She has a newsletter that she'll send out. Anyway, it's a really great story of how she came to make this program. It is also a little pricey. So when we first started because he had a formal diagnosis, we were able to use, and his doctor helped us with this, we were able to use our flex spending account to pay for some of these resources as long as it was for his dyslexia. Things have changed with insurances now, so I don't think we can do that anymore. I mean, I know we couldn't now. I don't know if other insurances would allow that, but ours will not. But that was really, really helpful that we were allowed to use our flex spending for that. It is, I think, still worth the investment, because a lot of these programs are kind of pricey, but just heads up, it is kind of pricey. A less pricier version is all about reading and all about spelling. And all of my other kids, that is what I used for them. And eventually I did move this son. The Barton Method has, I believe, 10 levels, and he got to about level 6. And then I switched him over, and we kind of did some review with all about reading and all about spelling. Another resource that is amazing, if your area has a learning center for dyslexias or for dyslexics, it is fantastic. It is, ours was free when I was doing it. I have a friend whose child's doing it now, and it has kind of gone back. It depends on how many donations they have at that time, but for her, it's gone back to costing pretty minimal, like maybe $100-ish for the year, to being free. And it's kind of flip-flopped for her. But it was a waiting list. I had to get them on this waiting list, but it was amazing. So just look up reading centers for dyslexia, see if there's one in your area. It'd be worth it, even if you had to drive maybe 45 minutes or so. I know people were driving even out of state to come, and it was just tutoring. For us, it was free. Like I said, it was amazing. What it did, it helped us not have to have that, because it was stressful for me and it was stressful for him and frustrating for both of us. So we were butting heads a lot with it. Like, it was just a really exhausting time together. So to be able to like take that off my plate and have a tutor work with him was wonderful. And he actually made great strides with that. I mean, he did it for 2 years, and when he was done, he was reading chapter books. It was wonderful. If you have one of those close by, awesome, take advantage of it. Get him on the list. You're going to need a formal diagnosis, most likely, to get on the list. They will probably do some testing, like retesting, when when your child's name comes up. That's what happened for ours. Wonderful resource. And then when he came back, that's when we started doing some review with all about reading and all about spelling. Okay, another resource that is awesome is audiobooks, because these kids often can listen forever. I remember having to like tell him, like, it was almost like TV for him, but it wasn't. I didn't see it like TV, but I had to kind of be like, okay, turn that off and go outside and play, because he could just listen to stories over and over and over again, and he understood. He remembered the details. He had amazing memory, and he understood what he was reading. I mean, these kids are very bright. They just take information in differently. And so if you can get Audible, if you can get books that are read on tape, if you can read aloud to them. I mean, reading aloud you should be reading aloud anyway. Like, that is just that's so healthy for children. Let's see. Oh, this is important. When he was in high school, there were some versions of textbooks. Like, I remember his science textbook, they had an audio version of it. So we would invest in that. Let's see. Oh, Focus on the Family. They do some wonderful full drama or full cast radio dramas. And they're Narnia. We could listen to that forever. So yeah, I would invest. It's an investment. If you can, like, whatever you can find free, obviously find those, get those. But we found it worth the investment to give him some audiobooks, because he was thirsting to get all that in, just like someone who loves to read. It was just a struggle for a while. And now he reads a lot. He is a voracious reader, but he listens to lots of podcasts and books on tape and all that stuff too. So that is a good resource. And the final resource, oh no, there's another resource. Another resource is some kind of like notation. The one that was kind of popular when he first got diagnosed was Dragon. It's like a voice dictation, so he can talk. Because oftentimes they have really great ideas, but to get it out of their mind and on paper is really hard. So if you can dictate for them, or if you can get some software that will dictate, we didn't use it a ton, but it is helpful. I think he uses it a lot for, like, especially like text and things like that. For school, you know, if I can help dictate and start getting, especially at the beginning, just to get it flowing, because that's hard for them. It's kind of like they kind of come like hitting a brick wall with that when they're trying to like write papers and stuff. So that's very helpful. And then the other thing is a 504 plan. Now, this is something I wish I had done a lot earlier in our homeschooling years with him, because not super early, but I waited till his senior year, because I found out that he could take that to college with him, and that could give him accommodations. Now he's in college, he hasn't used it, but I felt I felt like it was important for him to have that option if he needed it. So I kind of wish that I had done that maybe his sophomore year, because then he could have had some accommodations for testing. He did his standardized testing. He did not do well with his testing. He had to shine through the application process and getting into college. He had to shine in other ways. He had to shine through his essays, through his other talents. He had wonderful mentors that gave him great letters of recommendation. So that was really how he had to shine. I kind of wish I had gotten that for him, because testing is a big deal. That's a really hard thing for them. So that is a resource that, think about it. You do have to go through the school for that. So it depends on your feelings with that. I wish we had done it a couple years earlier. I would not have gone and had an IEP from early on. That would not have worked well with my family. All of my kids get technically an IEP from me, because all their schooling is individualized, but I would not have gone through the school for that. But for this, I think I would have, just for him to have had that document to take with him to college. Okay, the next question is, did you use any of the school resources? I've kind of already answered that question, but just a general answer to that question is not really, just only for that 504. As homeschoolers, we did use the school to do testing, standardized tests, like his SAT, ACT, because that's where testing occurs. He did do a couple AP tests in high school, and so those also happen at the school. But besides that, any of his testing, only for his 504 did I use the resources that the school gave. I did everything else privately. It worked for us. So there's some pros and cons to weigh with that as to what will work for your family, but that is what we did. Okay, and the last question is, does he still have dyslexia? So from my understanding is that you don't really get rid of dyslexia, you just learn to cope. So some things they're still hard for him. Spelling is really hard for him. But you know what? And starting writing, he's in college now, so starting writing assignments is kind of hard, because there's just that, it just gets kind of stuck in there. But he's doing well. He got into the college he wanted to get into with a scholarship, and his first semester he got straight A's. So I don't share that to brag. I just share, I'm incredibly proud of him, but just to give you hope, eventually this does click. And I guess the biggest thing for me is that I just had to kind of relax about it, because there's a lot of pressure on me to do everything. And I did work hard to get all the help that he needed, but I just realized that doors open that were just made for him. The thing that he's supposed to do in this life, those doors open in their time, and he gets to shine in those ways. And that is a beautiful thing. And now, looking back, I wish I had not been so stressed out about it, because I know that fed onto his stress levels a lot. So if that can share, if that success story can be shared with you, just to give you a little bit of calm and a little bit of peace, what they're meant to do, they're meant to do. And just keep giving them experiences. And then when they find that thing that just lights that fire under them, just feed that fire and they'll go. And it's so amazing to watch. So I hope that gives you some peace. Okay, just a few more resources, more for the mom. One of them is for your child too, but Overcoming Dyslexia. It's a good book. There's a few other ones. This is one that I have that can be useful to just for learning. And then Smart But Scattered and Smart But Scattered for Teens. Sometimes these children have a hard time with some of their executive functions, like organizing, planning, things like that. So those are helpful. And then I just was introduced to this book within the last couple months and got it from the library. I was so happy to read this. There's some sad parts because it's about this little girl who is going through school struggling with dyslexia. And so some of those things are hard because you see her peers and sometimes even adults just don't get her. they just don't understand. So that's kind of heart-wrenching. But it all ends up very happy with people understanding and her understanding just the brilliance of it. So, and there were some moments in here where she would describe what was going on in her head, and I was like, my son would comment about things like that. And anyway, there's just some different moments that I just, especially now, like looking back, like now that like I feel like it's a success story, you know, like I'm not in the thick of it. I look back and I'm like, yep, I can relate to this. It's a young adult book. It's a very, very easy read. But yeah, it's kind of fun if someone needs to read to understand or needs to be able to relate to someone else who has dyslexia. It's just a little novel. So that's a cute one. Okay, there's another book. I don't personally have it, but Dyslexia is My Superpower. That might be a good one to look into. And then there's a few podcasts that would be good to look into. The Dyslexia Quest, and Dyslexia is Our Superpower. And let's see. Yeah, those are the main ones that I had listened to a little bit. So anyway, I hope that helps you. I hope some of those resources help you. And like always, if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. And if I can help you or direct you into a resource that could help, I'd be happy to. So anyway, have a wonderful day and happy homeschooling.